let's talk about where we are now, a year later. And I do think you'll inform us that a lot of these conversations are going to be different than it might have been 2 weeks or a month ago in some respects. But just broadly, before we delve into the details, how would you describe Israel's position 1 year after October 7th, militarily, economically, diplomatically?
Let me start with militarily, because I think that more than anything drives the other two. I think that Israel has stabilized its security situation in the south with Gaza. Stabilized meaning it's virtually impossible for another October 7th to happen coming from Gaza, which, keep in mind, was one of the goals. Make sure this never happens again. One of the military goals, in so many words. I mean, they have different ways of defining it, but that's the gist of it. Make sure this place can never do that again. Unless Israel does something substantially different than it's doing now, that place will never be able to do that again from Gaza. So Israel has, if you think of Hamas as the equivalent of, again, I hate the characterization of Hamas as it's a terrorist organization, quote unquote, like as though it's some ragtag militia or something. It is not. Like Hezbollah, actually, which we'll get to in a moment, Hamas was, not is, but was the equivalent of a light infantry army of a sovereign state. That's how one has to think about it. And it was organized as such, 24 to 26 battalions, depending on how you count a couple of battalions. Battalions are organized based on different geographies of the Gaza Strip. They have real chains of command. They have a leadership structure. It's like, by the way, that's why I have not liked the characterization of what Israel's fighting as a counterinsurgency. It's not a counterinsurgency. What we dealt with in Iraq after the regime fell in Iraq, that was a counterinsurgency, because an insurgency came out of the rubble of the government falling, of the regime falling. In Gaza, Hamas is the regime. So it's not a counterinsurgency. Israel is effectively fighting a sovereign state's army. Again, it's not recognized as a sovereign state, but in terms of how it's organized. What Israel has done, I think, with great effect, although it's taken time, longer than it should have, Israel has broken almost all of these brigades. When I say broken, meaning it's not to say that every fighter in those brigades is dead or captured, but it means its organizational structure is broken. There's no chain of command anymore. So now it is fighting much more of like a ragtag militia, but it took time. Most of its leaders have been wiped out, including some that are really hard to get. Senor, we don't know the architect of the sort of the bin Laden of October 7th is, we don't know his situation right now. He's gone incommunicado. But it's safe to say one way or the other, he's on the run. And Israel now has options in Gaza, meaning it's effectively occupying. It's a temporary occupation, obviously, but it's effectively occupying. It's responsible right now for the military and the civilian administrative affairs in Gaza. And now it's got to decide, is it going to work with some other moderate, some kind of moderate Palestinian force that could take over the administrative responsibilities in Gaza? Is it going to rely on a third-party Arab state to play a role in that? I mean, it's figuring that out now. It's complicated, but at a minimum, it has a handle on the security situation in Gaza. So that's been impressive. And when I say it took too long, if you think of what needed to be done to make it happen, one of the things it needed to do was to get as far south as it could, because a lot of the decision-making infrastructure of Hamas was farther south, from the center of Gaza all the way down to Rafah, to the border with Gaza, to border with Egypt. And Israel was held up for a variety of reasons that included some holdups in internal Israeli decision-making, pressure from the Biden administration. I think a lot of what they have accomplished, they could have accomplished a lot sooner. But be that as it may, it's there now, and things are basically secure in the south, which allows it to focus on the north. In the north, Israel has exceeded all my expectations. I expected the north. I mean, we've all said that the north, the Hezbollah, the threat from Israel's north, from southern Lebanon, was a threat. Hezbollah, also the equivalent of a light infantry army, just bigger, better trained, more battlefield tested. And this is an army that had 10 times the munitions and rocket capabilities of Hamas. This is an army that has 10 times the personnel, and it has what Hamas did not have, which is it spent basically from 2012 on fighting in Syria because they were deployed to Syria by Iran to protect the regime of Bashar Assad. Hezbollah was really battlefield tested, and so I was terrified of what a war between the IDF and Hezbollah would look like, and we can get into this, but I think Israel has completely punctured those fears by what it has accomplished so far. And so I think for the first time, the war in Gaza, Israel learned a lot with time in fighting, but it ultimately has more or less prevailed. It was a muddle for a long time. The fight up north is not a muddle. Israel, once it decided to make a move, has moved aggressively. It had some capabilities that many of us didn't know it had. It also learned a lot, I think, from the South, from its fighting in Gaza, that has informed their decision making, and so I think that has had the effect of that. What that has triggered, the success with Hezbollah has given Israel confidence in dealing with the Houthis and other proxies in the region. And most importantly, it's given them self-confidence in dealing with Iran, which is, as Naftali Bennett has said on my podcast, and he says this elsewhere too, it's the head of the octopus. Unless you deal with the head of the octopus, you're not dealing with it. And for the first time, the head of the octopus seems to be very concerned. So I think for the first time since October 7th, Israel is very much on offense and has if you think of, I haven't used this analogy before, but I'll use it now. If you think of what happened on October 7th as a version of the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israel completely surprised. I think it was worse than the 73 Yom Kippur War, but let's just say it's the closest analogy in Israel's military history. The war it's fighting now feels like a 1967 moment, which is Israel is not waiting for events to react to. It is preemptively now throwing the enemy off balance. And that very much is like, if you think of, if you look at the eve of the 1967 war, the Six-Day War, where Israel decided to preemptively take out the air forces of Israel's Arab enemies in the region, and then fight the war that it was very successful in fighting, you can think of maybe the pager attack as like the equivalent of Israel preemptively taking out the air forces, of hitting the Egyptian Air Force, the Syrian Air Force. Now, in the 67 war, Israel could have stopped right there and said, all right, we've taken out these air forces. We've done enough, and now let's just, and that would have been a huge mistake. The key, the important developments of the Six-Day War is what followed that Israel pressed its advantage. There were some who were concerned that Israel was going to, after it did the Patriot attack, say, okay, we've destabilized them, we're done. And that too would have been a mistake. And what you're seeing now is Israel saying, no, now that we've destabilized them, we've got to start making big moves. They're making big moves. And I think for the first time, what you're seeing is a morale change, not only within Israel, because I think Israeli society has been stuck and traumatized for obvious reasons since October 7th. For the first time, I think you're seeing a morale boost within Israeli society as a result of the success they're having in the north and beyond. And I think you're seeing a changing of relations between the Arab states, specifically the Sunni Gulf, and Israel, which the Sunni Gulf, while they don't like Hamas and they were happy to see Israel wipe out Hamas, it was hard for them, certainly with the quote-unquote proverbial Arab street, to watch what was happening to Palestinians caught in the crossfire in Gaza. There is no love lost between these Sunni Gulf states and Hezbollah, and between these Sunni Gulf states and Iran. These Sunni Gulf states are terrified of Hezbollah and Iran, and to see Israel's resourcefulness, ingenuity, creativity, and just pure strength has the whole mood of the Sunni Gulf towards Israel has just done a 180 since over the last few weeks. And I'm seeing it. I'm hearing it with officials I'm talking to in the Gulf. I'm hearing it from CENTCOM officials who work with the Gulf states and Israel, U.S. CENTCOM. And so I think Israel has this military strength, to your question, has now created geopolitical and diplomatic capital that Israel didn't have before the most recent round of before these last few weeks.